As we know, we are currently awaiting the arrival of the latest version of Honkai Star Rail, which is version 3.5. And as usual in this video, I will provide character recommendations for that version, whether those characters are still relevant and worth obtaining in the current meta. So, as you know from the previous 3.5 livestream, there will be 4 characters we can obtain in the upcoming version. The characters are Hysilens, Cerydra, Kafka, and Silver Wolf. Of course, many of us, especially new players, will be confused about which character to choose in the upcoming version, right? So, without further ado, I'm Hoyostation and we're going straight into the video. Let's do this. Do you have a character or weapon in the game that you really want but you don't have enough stellar jades? Here's a smarter way to recharge your favorite games like Genshin Impact and Honkai Star Rail. Look no further than Lootbar. Lootbar is the most reliable top-up platform. It saves up to 23% for all orders compared with the official channel, and it provides an 80% off for your first purchase. It's 100% safe as you will only be using your UID. We will buy pack for 3000 stellar jades for $42, which otherwise would have costed $50, totally saving $7.5. We received the crystals we purchased in the less than 3 minutes. All recharges will be done through the official channel with MiHoYo, which allows you to enjoy all top-up offers. Ready to level up your gaming experience? Check the link in the description to get the amazing discount. Alright, now we will move on to the most anticipated part, which is the discussion of the characters that will appear in the upcoming version. The first character we will discuss is the new character everyone's been waiting for, Hysilens, a Annihilated Path damage over time DPS who is said to bring back the long-abandoned DOT meta for future versions. Hysilens is a character with the physical type and Annihilated Path who can inflict DOT on enemies and also deal additional random DOT through their talent. The advantage of Hysilens is that she also has an ultimate called Maelstrom Rhapsody, which will create a zone within the field for 3 turns. This zone can reduce enemy attack and defense, and cause enemies to receive additional physical damage over time when they are affected by damage over time, making characters like Kafka a great match for Hysilens because she can trigger damage over time through her skills, talent, and ultimate. Additionally, when Hysilens uses her ultimate, she will also trigger the damage over time effects on all enemies, dealing 150% of the original damage. This effect is similar to Kafka's ultimate, allowing Hysilens to be both a DPS and a sub-DPS, triggering damage over time while also applying damage over time debuffs to enemies. Here's a brief overview of her talent. Hysilens can randomly inflict damage over time status on enemies when teammates attack. The damage from damage over time statuses like Wind Shear, Burn, or Shock inflicted through this talent depends on Hysilens' attack stat. Whereas if the enemy has Bleed, the damage dealt depends on 20% of the enemy's maximum HP, up to 25% of Hysilens' attack. Of course, with these differences, enemy types like elites and bosses will receive higher bleed damage because elite and boss enemies generally have very high maximum HP. So, is this character worth getting for you in version 3.5? I give it an 8 out of 10. With the caveat that if you have Kafka or plan to get Kafka, which is confirmed to be rerun in version 3.5. Well, overall, this character is one that can inflict debuffs and deal deadly damage to all enemies. However, despite being quite strong, this character's kit cannot function optimally without the help of other support characters, such as Kafka and Black Swan. Therefore, you need both characters to maximize Hysilens' kit. Hysilens can deal massive damage and perform well in all 3 endgame content types, especially in the upcoming version of MOC, which will feature Lygas and Gepard, both of whom have physical weakness types. A little discussion about her signature icon, called Why Does the Ocean Sing, which has an effect that pairs very well with Hysilens, and I highly recommend you get it if you plan to get Hysilens in the upcoming versions. The increase in this Lightcon's effect hit rate is excellent for Hysilens, as she requires a certain effect hit rate stat to maximize her kit, and Kafka has a trace that can increase character attack by 100% if the character has an effect hit rate of 75% or more. Additionally, this Lightcon also grants the status called Enthrallment to enemies, causing them to receive up to 30% more damage over time damage at its maximum limit. This Lycon will certainly increase the damage output of Hysilens and all teammates who deal damage over time attacks. For the next character, we will discuss Kafka, who received a buff in version 3.4 and will have a rerun in the upcoming version. Kafka is a lightning type character with a Nihility path, making her a sub DPS who can trigger damage over time effects without waiting for the enemy's turn first. After the buff, Kafka experienced a significant performance boost, as she can trigger the enemy's target damage over time through her skills, talent, and ultimate, with varying damage percentages and the number of enemy targets. On the other hand, her skill called Caressing Moonlight, which is a blast type, will inflict damage over time on 3 enemies with 75% of the original damage to 1 main enemy target and 50% of the original damage to 2 enemies around the main target. Then, the talent called Gentle but Cruel will launch a follow-up attack on enemy target hit by teammates' attack. This follow-up attack will trigger damage over time on 1 enemy for 80% of the original damage. As for her ultimate, Twilight Thrill, it will deal lightning damage and also trigger damage over time on all enemies for 120% of the original damage. Of course, with all these effects, Kafka can be the best sub DPS for Hysilens, who can also inflict damage over time on enemies through her kit. In addition to triggering damage over time, Kafka will now also provide a buff of 100% increased attack to team members, including herself, who have a 75% or higher attack hit rate through her trace called Torture. This attack increase can certainly be utilized by teammates like Hysilens and Black Swan. Therefore, the more DPS characters in the team, the greater the effect of this trace will be. Indeed, according to data from PrideWindow.gg, Kafka's overall performance is quite lacking, even after she received a buff in version 3.4. Currently, it only has 1.89% usage on MOC, 34% on Pure Fiction, and 4.37% on Apocalyptic Shadow. Of course, with this data, Kafka can still be used in Pure Fiction mode, considering that this version 3.4 of Pure Fiction has a very beneficial damage over time buff for Kafka's team. However, with the arrival of Hysilens in version 3.5, it's hoped that the damage over time team will be shine again, which will also bring Kafka back into the current meta. From my personal perspective, Kafka herself is still worth considering if you want to pull Hysilens in version 3.5. I also give the same score as Hysilens, which is 8 out of 10 if you have both. If we compare it to the latest characters that will be released in version 3.6, rumored to be March 7th and Danhang, Kafka is still worth pulling if you intend to get Hysilens. However, if you don't intend to have damage over time team, or don't have damage over time characters like Kafka or Black Swan, you can skip and save for interesting characters in the future, such as the latest March 7th, who is said to be an Ice Remembrance DPS. A brief discussion about her signature Lycon, Patience, is all you need, which has effects that are well suited and still relevant to the buffed Kafka. This Lycon increases damage, speed, and inflicts additional lightning damage over time on enemies through the debuff called Erode. However, with the increased need for Kafka's attack hit rate, Lycons like Jiaochu's Those Many Springs can provide slightly higher performance. If you don't have her signature Lycon, I would recommend using the 4-star alternative Lycon we can get for free called Before the Tutorial Mission Starts, which will provide attack hit rate and energy to Kafka if she attacks enemies with the defense reduction debuff. Of course, this energy boost will be very useful for Kafka to launch her ultimate more consistently, considering Kafka's role has changed to a sub DPS for a damage over time team that can provide buffs and also trigger damage over time. Next, we will discuss Cerydra, who is also a new character set to be released in the upcoming version, specifically in the second phase. Cerydra has a wind type with the Harmony path, which will automatically make her a support character. She has a rather unique kit, where she can duplicate the skills of teammates who have the buff called P-Rage, which is given by Cerydra to one teammate. This will certainly make DPS characters like Finan and Anaxa very suitable to be paired with Cerydra, as both have the highest damage output through their skills. Okay, Cerydra has a skill called Pounce Promotion. Basically, this skill can grant military merit to one teammate, Once the military merit points reach 6, the military merit will be strengthened to P range, and the effects of military merit will remain active. Characters with a P range will receive a 72% increase in critical damage for skill damage, 10% all-type resistant penetration, and trigger the coup de main effect after using a skill on an enemy. Coup de main will duplicate the skill and relaunch it exactly as it was launched before. This means that if we launch the skill in enhanced mode, the duplication from coup de main will also launch the enhanced skill. So Cerydra will be a great fit for characters whose main damage comes from skills, like Finan and Anexa. Cerydra can also provide other buffs through her talent, such as an attack buff to teammate with military merit equal to 24% of Cerydra's attack, and additional wind damage equal to 60% of her attack, which can be triggered up to 20 times. This effect is similar to Robin's ultimate, which can deal additional physical damage during the ultimate's duration. Of course, with this effect, the team's damage output will become even greater, considering the limit on additional damage provided by Cerydra can reset each time Cerydra casts her ultimate. Additionally, an interesting point about military merit is that this buff has no turn duration, meaning we can use Cerydra's basic attack if we don't have enough skill points without worrying about the duration of the military merit applied. So, is Cerydra worth taking in the upcoming 3.5? Well, overall, I give it a score of 8.5 out of 10, and even more so if you currently have Finan or Anexa. It should be noted that as of now, only Finan and Anexa can maximize the buff effect provided by Cerydra. Although Cerydra is a unique and good support character, she herself has a weakness. The critical damage increase buff for skill damage and the 10% resistant penetration increase will only be applied if the teammate has 6 military merit charges. And once those charges are used up, both buffs will also disappear. If we compare Cerydra with the characters coming in the upcoming version 3.6, for those of you who have Finan or Anexa, you can focus on getting Cerydra first, as she can provide a performance boost of up to 20% for the Finan team and around 10% for Anexa. This is assuming both teams use Robin as a secondary support, replaced by Cerydra. Certainly, this performance boost will have a significant impact, especially on the Finan team, both in terms of increased damage and ultimate charge. But if you don't intend to get Cerydra in version 3.5, you can still use secondary supports like Robin, Tribi, and Ranmei as more universally applicable alternatives for many team compositions. A brief overview of Cerydra's signature light cone, Epoch Etched by Golden Blood, reveals effects that are well suited for Cerydra. This light cone will provide an attack boost at skill points after using the ultimate and also increase the damage of allies targeted by the user's skills. Of course, the effect of this light cone will be very useful for increasing Cerydra's personal damage as well as the damage of your main DPS. Additionally, the effects of this light cone are quite universal, so it can still be used by other characters who need additional effects through this light cone. Okay, now we will move on to the rerun of the second phase, which will feature Silverwolf, who also received a buff in version 3.4. Silverwolf has a quantum type with the Nihility path that can inflict implant weakness based on the first character in your lineup, and also reduce the resistance of the implanted weakness type by 20%. This effect will certainly be useful against enemies who do not have the weakness type that your main DPS possesses, such as when you use an archer against Sule, who does not have a quantum weakness. She also has an ultimate called User Band, which can reduce all enemies' defense by 45% for 3 turns, which will certainly be useful for increasing the damage of most main DPS characters in this game. The defense reduction effect of this ultimate is similar to Pela's ultimate, which can provide a 40% defense reduction to all enemies for 2 turns. However, the defense reduction from Silverwolf and the duration provided are still higher compared to Pela, who is a 4-star character, guys. Additionally, she also has a talent that can inflict a debuff called Bug with random effects on enemies. The debuffs inflicted are attack reduction, defense reduction, and speed reduction. And this debuff can be applied with any attack, so even Silverwolf's basic attack will inflict Bug on enemies. According to data I gathered from Pride.GG, Silverwolf has maintained a very high tier since she received a buff in version 3.4, where she held the highest support position in Apocalyptic Shadow. This is understandable considering Silverwolf can provide the implant weakness that is crucial for causing enemies to enter a weakness break state, as we know that in Apocalyptic Shadow, enemies who are weakness broken take higher damage. Silverwolf has a usage rate of 9.4% on MOC, 7% on Pure Fiction, and 11% on Apocalyptic Shadow. That number is still considered quite low, considering Silverwolf's overall performance is still inferior to other supports, even though she received a significant buff in version 3.4, guys. This is certainly related to the abundance of support characters who offer more benefits, such as Robin, Tribi, Cypher, and also Ruan Mei, who is more universal and can be used in many team compositions. So, is Silverwolf still worth getting on her rerun in the upcoming version 3.5? Well, I give a score of 8 out of 10 for both long-time and new players. I highly recommend you get Silverwolf if you still need a debuffer who can inflict implant weakness and reduce the enemy's defense. A brief overview of her signature Lancon, Incessant Rain, reveals some rather unique effects, as some of the effects within this Lancon are not particularly useful for her. Increasing effect hit rate will be very useful for Silverwolf, ensuring her kit can debuff enemies. However, the increase in critical rate provided is less useful considering Silverwolf's primary function is to be a support who can debuff enemies. So I don't recommend you get this signature Lancon and instead use a cheaper and easier to obtain 4-star alternative like Resolution Shines as Pearls of Sweat, which can provide additional enemy defense reduction. Okay guys, maybe that's all for now. What do you think about these 4 characters? Feel free to leave any comments down below and don't forget to check out my other videos because they are just as cool. Thanks for watching, stay safe, stay healthy, and see you in the next video.